Hey guys, tonight we slip into silk tunics, lace up pointy leather shoes, and step into a banquet hall lit only by flickering candlelight and the gleam of a few polished silver goblets. Long wooden tables creak under the weight of steaming pies, roasted birds, and jugs. So many jugs. You sit between two lords you've never met, both of whom are already red-faced and halfway through their second cups of wine. One of them tries to toast you with a chicken leg. This isn't your average Friday happy hour. You've time-traveled into the lavish, loud, and sometimes suspiciously sticky world of medieval noble drinking culture. The wine here? Strong, sweet, sometimes cloudy, and definitely not subject to any sort of FDA regulation. You take a cautious sniff. It smells like fermented plums and the faint whisper of regret. You glance down the table. A baroness is pouring hers directly into her soup. Classy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach for your cup again. It's heavy, pewter, slightly warm to the touch. The red liquid inside sloshes thickly. It's definitely wine, but not like anything you'd find in a 2025 Bordeaux catalog. Medieval wine is complicated. For one, it wasn't aged like we do today. Most of it was drunk young, basically months after being made, and it could sour fast if not stored properly. So people flavored it, with herbs, with honey, with literal tree bark. Because when life gives you vinegar, you drown it in the cinnamon and pretend it's festive. This evening's vintage? Likely a rough blend of imported grapes from southern France or Italy, though if you're somewhere in England, odds are it was shipped in barrels across the channel and lost about 30% of its dignity en route. And yes, nobles drank it constantly, at feasts, during meetings, even at breakfast. It wasn't just about the alcohol. Wine symbolized wealth, access, and a certain I own at least 3 villages level of status. In some courts, not offering wine to your guests was like hosting a dinner party today and forgetting to charge your LED light strip. Embarrassing. But here's the kicker. Even this fancy feast wine was often diluted with water. Not to make it weaker, oh no. The idea was that drinking wine undiluted was considered vulgar. Barbaric. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder literally judged people by their wine-to-water ratio, and that little snobbery lingered into the medieval period. Historians still argue whether this dilution habit was about taste, custom, or just a clever way to stretch the good stuff longer during winter. As you sip, a servant behind you bumps the table. Oops, your wine ripples ominously. The cups aren't standardized, by the way. One might hold a pint, another might be no larger than a shot glass, and they're not labeled. You just guess and hope. Kind of like trying mystery sodas at a fast food soda fountain, but with more consequences. Suddenly, a minstrel strikes a lute and starts singing about a drunken goose. Everyone laughs, probably because they relate. Your neighbor starts pouring again, and this time you notice. He's got a small pouch tied to his belt. Inside? Dried rosemary, likely. A personal spice stash used to flavor his wine on demand. Oh yes, this was a thing. Think of it as the medieval version of adding 5 pumps of hazelnut syrup to your Starbucks order. Except, less sterile and more likely to have chunks in it. Another servant sweeps by with a jug labeled Hippocras. You've heard of this. It's wine infused with sugar, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and anything else that wasn't nailed down in the pantry. It was the ultimate medieval party punch, often served at the end of the meal to aid digestion. More like to launch digestion into orbit and let it sort itself out. You sip. It's like drinking warm, boozy apple pie filling. Not bad. Could be worse. Could be Pascha, a Roman leftover drink made of vinegar and herbs that some lower-ranking knights still swear by. Pascha was the electrolyte drink of its day. Not tasty, but efficient. Brutally so. Back to your feast. You watch as nobles clink cups, give increasingly loud toasts, and oh, here comes the part where someone falls backward off a bench. Classic. A herald announces the arrival of an imported vintage from Gascony. Everyone oohs. The noble hosting the party beams with pride. Age 6 whole months in oak, he declares. As if that's impressive. It's not. But no one says anything because he owns all the sheep in the county. The cupbearer enters now, a serious-looking man with the suspiciously clean hands of someone who doesn't trust anything. His job? Pour drinks, sure. But also test for poison. You watch as he takes a small silver spoon, dips it into the wine, and tastes it first. Then he nods. Only then does he pass it along to the Lord. You wonder how often he's genuinely at risk versus just following tradition, but hey, better one dead cupbearer than a dead duke. Nearby, a lesser noble argues with a monk about whether red or white is more Christian. Apparently, red symbolizes Christ's blood, but white is cleaner. The monk looks tired. He probably just wants to go back to his scriptorium and doodleboard rabbits in the margins of manuscripts. The debate dies down as a juggler enters, balancing goblets on his head. Someone throws him a coin. You start to notice the floor is sticky. Very sticky. Wine, spilled stew, maybe a little mead. Because let's face it, everyone's double-fisting their drinks tonight. And you're just trying to stay awake. But honestly, this candlelight, this warmth, this low murmur of tipsy nobles retelling badly remembered crusade stories, it's kind of cozy. Almost like medieval ASMR. Before you know it, you're staring into your goblet again. The last drops glimmer like rubies in the firelight. Sweet, spiced, slightly smoky. It's not the worst way to end a night in the Middle Ages, unless you overdo it. Then, the next morning, yeah, you probably won't survive this. You wake up early the next morning, not because you want to, but because a rooster outside sounds like it's doing death metal vocals. Your head feels like it's been personally stomped by a warhorse. Congratulations! You've survived your first noble feast, and yet, even in this groggy haze, you're handed another cup. But this one's not wine. It's ale. Yes, ale. Brown, murky, frothy stuff that smells like a loaf of bread and a wet barn. Welcome to your daily medieval hydration plan. Because while the nobles reserved wine for feast, diplomacy, and casual poisonings, ale was the real MVP of medieval liquid life. Everyone drank it. Lords, ladies, monks, peasants, your neighbor's goat, probably. And it was drunk all day. Morning, noon, evening, and especially whenever water looked suspiciously swampy, which was always. You sip, it's warm, slightly bitter, but surprisingly refreshing in a better-than-cholera sort of way. This isn't your modern IPA, by the way. Medieval ale was brewed without hops for centuries, which means it went bad faster and had a lighter, breadier taste. It was more like a liquid snack than a buzz. And speaking of buzz, this stuff was usually very low in alcohol, especially the popular small ale that practically replaced water. Children drank it. Monks fasted on it. Laborers chugged it by the gallon before noon. You wander into the kitchen area of the manor, huge stone hearth, iron kettles bubbling, and someone shouting at a scullery boy about burnt porridge. Here, a woman stirs a massive pot of barley mash. She's brewing ale the way it's been done for centuries. Boiling grains, cooling the mash, then letting it ferment in giant wooden tubs. No fancy thermometers, no sanitary gloves, just wild yeast and blind faith. One quirky twist? Sometimes the brew had herbs tossed in, nettle, yarrow, or something ominously called ale hoof. Historians still argue whether these were for flavor or for some early attempt at medicine. Or maybe just because someone was bored and had access to a hedge. You duck as someone swings a ladle over your head and pours a steaming bucket of ale into a waiting barrel. This batch will be ready in a couple days, maybe even sooner if it's warm. No aging required, no bottling either. It's all served from casks or jugs. People came with their own containers, cups, wooden tankards, or just hollowed out horns if they wanted to flex. Now here's a fun bit. Ale wasn't just a beverage. It was also a social and economic powerhouse. Brewing was one of the few trades where women, known as alewives, could make serious coin. These ladies ran their own businesses, selling fresh ale from home, marked with a leafy ale stake over the door. A medieval beer sign, basically. Some even got rich off it, until guilds and regulations tightened, and surprise, surprise, the men took over. But for now, back to your cup. You wander through the manor gardens, sipping and watching bees buzz around wildflowers. A squire walks past with a tankard, probably headed to sparring practice. Yep, even training nights pre-gamed with ale. It gave energy, staved off thirst, and let's be honest, made bruises hurt a little less. Still, not all ale was created equal. The richer the estate, the more refined the grain. Some households used wheat or oats instead of the usual barley. And if you were truly fancy, you might even add sweeteners like honey or date syrup. But for most folks, it was a rough, honest drink, gulped down in between chores and never left sitting too long. Another surprising detail? Some nobles tried to make ale into a health tonic. Monastic medical texts list ale recipes spiked with everything from licorice root to wormwood, supposedly to ease digestion, balance the humors, or just distract you from your medieval life crisis. At a nearby table, two older men are arguing. One insists that ale should only be consumed fresh and cloudy. The other swears his uncle once aged a barrel for 3 months and saw visions of St. Cuthbert. You're pretty sure that was just mold. You glance around and realize everyone is drinking. A gardener, a falconer, a cook, a 10-year-old chasing a chicken with a wooden sword. All holding mugs of ale. It's communal, constant, comforting even. But with great ale comes great responsibility, or at least the need to make more of it. Ale didn't store well, especially without hops, which means most households brewed it weekly or even daily. There were no 6-packs to stash in the root cellar. You made it, drank it, then made more. It was a cycle of eternal fermentation. You pass by the ale storage room. It smells like wet wood, damp grain, and a hint of regret. Inside, barrels stacked like puzzle pieces, sloshing with barely sealed tops. Someone sneezes in the corner. Sanitation? Let's not talk about it. Suddenly, a boy runs past you shouting "small ale" for the lady, and hands a fresh mug to an elderly noblewoman sitting by the fire. She takes a delicate sip, nods, and returns to her embroidery. Yep. Even Grandma's day starts with a little buzz. Here's where things get weird. In times of scarcity, some households reuse their grain mash for a second brew. The result? A weaker ale often called second runnings. It tasted like someone rinsed a cereal bowl with warm water and whispered the word beer over it. But it kept the thirst at bay. And in lean times, even nobles drank it. With a frown. But they drank it. As you sit near the hearth, nursing your own mug, you overhear talk of ale taxation. Apparently, kings occasionally taxed how much ale a household brewed or sold, especially during wars. Because when swords clash and taxes rise, booze becomes very, very valuable. No surprise there. A servant spills a bucket nearby. The floor is now slightly ale-flavored. A dog licks it, sneezes, and wanders off. You wonder how many stories in this manner begin with, "So I had a few ales and then..." A woman next to you leans in and whispers that the lord of the manor is considering switching to beer. Real beer made with hops. Scandalous. In this part of England, hops are still considered foreign, even a bit suspect. Some folks believed they were unhealthy. Others thought they made people sleepy. Which, let's be honest, might actually be a plus. "Beer is the future," she says conspiratorially. "Mark my words." You smile, nod politely, and take another sip of your humble, hopless ale. It's not glamorous, it's not complex, but it's what gets this manor moving and what fuels half the kingdom. And with every warm, bready gulp, you start to appreciate its role. Not just as a drink, but as a daily ritual. A connection to the earth, to each other, and to a time when every cup carried history in its foam. Also, it's still better than medieval water. Let's never forget that. You find yourself seated beside a different kind of noble tonight. One with fingers encrusted not with dirt, but with gold rings, and a goblet that smells like something between a perfume shop and a spice rack. Tonight's drink? It isn't just ale or wine, it's luxury. Liquid luxury. The servant calls it claret with eastern notes, which is a polite way of saying it's been absolutely doused in imported spices. One sip and you're hit with cinnamon, clove, maybe even nutmeg. The taste is rich, warm, and just a bit overwhelming, like drinking the inside of a treasure chest. Welcome to the strange, fragrant world of spice-infused drinks. Medieval nobles, always eager to flaunt their wealth, went wild for exotic flavors. And nothing said, "I'm richer than your entire bloodline," quite like saffron in your cup. Spices like pepper, ginger, cardamom, cinnamon, and galangal weren't just for food. They were steeped into wines, meads, and syrups to create an experience as dramatic as a peacock on a platter. You swirl the drink. There's a bit of residue at the bottom, maybe ground almonds or crushed dried roses? Could be both. One recipe from a 14th century noble's household included crushed violets and orange peel, along with a splash of something mysterious called borage water. Historians still argue whether borage was added for flavor, medicinal purposes, or just because someone saw a flower and thought, "Let's drink it." You lean back, letting the spices hit your tongue in waves. Sweet, floral, then suddenly sharp. It's intoxicating, not just the alcohol, but the sheer theater of it. This isn't just drinking, it's performance. Every ingredient imported, every sip a statement. And here's the kicker. Many of these spices came from very far away. India, Southeast Asia, even the Arabian Peninsula. And they didn't exactly travel first class. No, they arrived in Europe by land and sea, carried on the backs of camels and in the holds of ships that were regularly attacked by pirates, ransacked by rival kingdoms, and occasionally eaten by rats. By the time they reached your goblet, those cloves were more valuable than gold. Naturally, this made spicy drinks a flex. Not everyone could afford to turn their wine into a hot cross bun. Only the elite could afford this kind of extravagance regularly. And boy, did they lean into it. You glance across the hall and spot a noblewoman, holding court with a drink that glows slightly in the firelight. It's pale yellow, with saffron strands floating like golden seaweed. "For my complexion," she says, not entirely joking. Some believed saffron could brighten the skin, ease melancholy, or even work as a mild aphrodisiac. Science? Vibes? Strong. Servants glide by with trays of other drinks. One smells like mulled pear. Another has a reddish hue and is served warm, with crushed anise and a slice of dried fig on the rim. Because yes, medieval nobles invented the garnish. Somewhere, a hipster bartender just cried. You overhear a conversation between two knights about the cost of pepper per ounce this season. They're not joking. Pepper was ridiculously expensive. In fact, it was so valuable that wealthy families stored it in locked chests. In some transactions, it was literally used in place of currency. And it wasn't just about flavor. Spices were also believed to balance your bodily humors. Too much cold and wet in your system? Add ginger. Feeling melancholy? Cinnamon and wine. Got a touch of plague? Try clove-studded orange. And maybe a quick prayer. You're handed a new drink, this one chilled, oddly enough. A small ceramic cup filled with a concoction of almond milk, rose water, and spiced syrup. It's smooth, creamy, and tastes like Valentine's Day in a monastery. A few almonds bob on top like confused sailors. One of the nobles leans in and whispers, "This was made for the queen once." You're not sure whether to be impressed or concerned, but he's already refilling your cup. Suddenly, someone shouts from the far end of the hall. A bet is being placed. Two nobles argue over whether the drink they're holding contains real saffron or a cheap substitute made from marigolds. A monk is summoned as a judge. He sniffs both cups, makes a show of swirling and sipping, then solemnly declares the winner. The loser must donate a full pound of pepper to the church, which might sound silly until you realize that's roughly equivalent to donating a car today. Here's a strange one for you. Some lords even drank a kind of vinegar-based tonic called oxymel. A mix of honey, vinegar, and spices, sometimes served warm. It was supposed to cure sore throats, fatigue, and general malaise. You take a sip. It's tangy, medicinal, like drinking pickled hope. Not the worst thing, but also not a beverage you'd write home about. Another cup arrives. This one smells distinctly of cloves and wine. Ah, yes, Hippocras again. It makes a return appearance at nearly every noble event, like that one friend who always brings the same bottle of Merlot to parties. But Hippocras had gravitas. Some recipes included ginger, grains of paradise, an actual spice, not a metaphor, and even powdered sandalwood. Historians still debate whether these spice drinks were genuinely tasty to medieval palates, or if people just pretended to enjoy them because they were so expensive. Maybe both. After all, nothing says I'm rich like sipping something that tastes like a spiced shoelace and saying, delightful. You find a seat near the hearth. The fire crackles. A man across from you is gently toasting a slice of bread over the flames and dipping it in his spiced wine. Medieval fondue? Maybe. Or maybe he just invented the world's soggiest dessert. There's something comforting about it all. The warmth, the scent, the low murmur of voices speaking in 10 different dialects about pepper prices and gout remedies. You swirl your goblet one last time, watching the tiny bits of cinnamon sink to the bottom. It's not just about getting tipsy, it's about belonging. Every spice in that cup was touched by sailors, merchants, traders, and hands across continents. It's a global story reduced to one rich, pungent mouthful. And just like that, you feel a little sleepier. The heat of the wine, the weight of the spices, the muffled laughter of nobles in various stages of tipsy poetry recitation. It all wraps around you like a velvet curtain. One more sip. Just one. And the room begins to blur, softly, sweetly, like cinnamon fog. You come to, still at the long table, still surrounded by nobles, but now the candlelight has dimmed, the fire has burned lower, and the chatter has dropped into a mellow hum. Someone near you is softly snoring into their trencher of bread, and in front of you, a golden goblet, sticky, floral, absolutely reeking of honey. Welcome to the world of mead, the drink of choice for poets, warriors, newlyweds, and anyone who thinks wine is too sour and ale too. Well, peasanty. You lift the goblet, it's heavier than it looks, rimmed with gold, possibly kissed by a dozen royal lips before yours. The liquid inside glows amber like melted sunlight, thick with sweetness and ancient ambition. You sip. It's syrupy, fragrant, and just the tiniest bit fizzy. Mead. The OG of alcoholic beverages. Archaeological evidence suggests people were brewing it before they figured out how to ride horses or write the word cheers. But tonight's batch isn't from a dusty cave. It's from a noble cellar brewed with wildflower honey, hints of rose, and probably some questionable water from a stream with too many frogs in it. Still, it tastes like medieval romance in a cup. You look around. The vibe has changed. Earlier, it was courtly noise and toasts. Now it's soft lute music, whispered flattery, and long looks exchanged by torchlight. That's the mead talking. You're now deep in the post-feast phase, when nobles shift from boasting about land holdings to blushing at sonnets and scribbling love notes on parchment. You lean closer to a conversation about the bridal cup, a special mead brewed for weddings, meant to ensure happiness, fertility, and possibly a few awkward wedding night mishaps. It was often laced with extra herbs, not all of which were for taste. Some were said to boost desire, while others just made you fall asleep before causing any trouble. Historians still argue whether mead's romantic associations were purely symbolic, or if it actually had mild aphrodisiac effects. What we know for sure, a lot of people ended up with 9 kids and absolutely no memory of the wedding toast. A serving girl walks by with a ceramic jug labeled Melomel. Someone at the table perks up. You're told this is fruit-infused mead. Tonight's batch has blackberries and elderflower. You snag a cup. It's like drinking honey through a berry bush. One noble next to you sighs dreamily and announces he shall name his next falcon Melomel. Everyone applauds. You start clapping too. No one knows why. There's a bard standing by the fire now. His song is slow, lilting, and oddly tearful, for someone singing about a goat falling in love with a windmill. That's mead for you. It doesn't make you rowdy. It makes you reflective. You look into your goblet and wonder if your childhood goat ever loved you back. Probably not. She did eat your boots. As you sip, you notice something peculiar about the aftertaste. It's not just honey and fruit. There's a faint bitterness. You ask, and the noble beside you explains. Herbs. Some brewers added things like heather, rosemary, even lavender. Others, if they were feeling particularly bold, experimented with more obscure plants like hyssop or wormwood. They claimed these additions aided digestion or cleared the humors, though most of them just made you burp more poetically. And mead wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of peace, of treaties, of sacred moments. In Norse tradition, it was believed that the gods themselves drank mead in Valhalla. Medieval poets called it nectar of the soul, and certain courts even had official mead tasters whose entire job was to sample brews and declare which batch deserved the royal lips. You watch as a servant presents a particularly ornate goblet to a dowager countess. She sips delicately, nods, then passes it on to her granddaughter. A generational ritual, sweetened by centuries. You can almost feel the honey clinging to history. Nearby, a younger knight tries to impress a noblewoman by describing his family's private beehive estate. The bees are hand-fed roses, he says. She's clearly not buying it, but she's drinking his mead, so maybe that's victory enough. Someone passes around a tiny cup of something called metheglin. The name alone sounds like a medieval sleeping spell. It's herbed mead, heavy with spices, meant to be sipped slowly. You try it. It's like inhaling an herb garden and washing it down with syrup. Not unpleasant, just medieval. A scholar nearby remarks that metheglin comes from the Welsh words for healing drink. Apparently monks once prescribed it for colds, melancholia, and whatever ailment caused people to hear voices in the walls. A noble laughs and says, I once heard a wall recite Chaucer backwards. You're unsure whether that's the metheglin or a deeper issue. Another servant appears, this one bearing oxymel mead, a mead vinegar hybrid that seems to be designed solely to separate the brave from the foolish. You decline, politely, but you've noticed something important tonight. Unlike wine or ale, mead has this curious ability to slow time. You aren't slurring or staggering, you're warm, gentle. Your shoulders relax. The fire crackles just a bit softer. Even the floor feels less sticky. It's as if mead doesn't want to get you drunk. It wants to lull you. To press you into your chair and whisper stories of bees and flowers until your eyes droop. A servant offers you one final cup. This is the Lord's favorite, she says. It's a clear mead, chilled, with a floating petal and a twist of orange rind. You sip. It's divine. Smooth, fragrant, and elegant. The kind of drink you'd offer to a guest you never want to leave. And secretly hope does anyway so you can finish their cup. You glance around. Most of the hall has settled into sleepy conversation. A few guests doze openly. The bard's song fades. The noble next to you gently snores into a cushion embroidered with bees. And you? You're halfway through your final cup. Not rushed, just floating somewhere between honeyed bliss and historical daydream. One last thought before you fade. Someone, somewhere, gathered flowers, raised bees, boiled water, waited days for fermentation. All so you could taste this exact moment. Sweet dreams come easier when they taste like flowers and firelight. The mead lingers warmly in your belly as you drift from the great hall to somewhere quieter. Stone corridors echoing with the faint tread of soft shoes and the flutter of a candle. You're following a monk now, apparently invited to observe an ancient tradition. He speaks little, but you catch a whiff of barley and pride. You're about to enter the strange, solemn, and surprisingly competitive world of monastic brewing. You expect prayer and silence. Instead, you get rows of bubbling cauldrons, barrels stacked to the ceiling, and a group of monks in hoods arguing over the strength of the last batch. One of them just called the prior's latest ale blasphemously weak. Turns out, behind monastery walls, monks weren't just translating Aristotle or illuminating manuscripts. They were brewing some of the best booze in medieval Europe. And not just to sip after Vespers. Brewing was income, hospitality, nutrition, even charity. The Benedictines and Cistercians were known for their high standards. Brewing in a religious setting meant cleanliness, patience, and that particular kind of obsession only a monk could have. They recorded recipes with detail rivaling modern cookbooks. How much malt, what kind of water, how long to ferment. One famous abbey had 4 different grades of beer: light for novices, hearty for guests, rich for feast days, and liquid bread for Lent. Seriously, some monks literally fasted by drinking beer instead of eating solid food. Historians still debate whether this was holy discipline or just the world's sneakiest loophole. The monk guiding you gestures proudly toward a vat of dark, rich-smelling brew. "We call it Black Soul," he whispers. "Very popular with visiting knights. Makes them see angels, or claim they did." You raise an eyebrow, he grins. He's not kidding. And here's the quirky bit. Monks didn't just brew beer. Some monasteries experimented with herbal liqueurs like wormwood-infused tonics, digestifs with mint, and mysterious potions meant to purify the spleen. Whether they worked is questionable, but the branding, impeccable. A few became famous enough to survive into modern times. Ever heard of chartreuse? That's monk magic. Literally. You're handed a wooden mug of what they call meditation ale. It's dark, nutty with a weird hint of lavender and something earthy. Maybe thyme? You take a sip. It tastes like a forest is hugging your tongue. But gently. One brother insists the secret lies in their well water, which bubbles up through blessed limestone. Another swears it's the yeast, hand-cultivated from the abbey walls over generations. You just nod slowly, pretending to understand fermentation as you sip what might be the most spiritually confusing drink of your life. Nearby, a monk sharpens a quill and mutters to himself about the temperature curve during the 3rd hour of the mash. You step carefully past him. This is sacred ground. Holy yeast lives here. In one dark corner, an elderly monk sits with a row of tiny ceramic cups. He's the taster, appointed by the abbot himself. His job? To sample each barrel before it's declared fit for use. You watch as he sips one, pauses, then slowly writes something on a scrap of parchment. It reads, "Smoother than Brother Peter's homilies." High praise indeed. The brewing process, you learn, takes days. Malting the barley, drying it over fires, which sometimes added smoky flavors. Boiling the mash, fermenting, then casking. And unlike secular brewers, the monks did it all with the same care they gave to liturgy. Brewing was a kind of worship. Every bubble a prayer. You're shown the cellar, cool, stone-walled candle lit. The barrels here are older than most noble lineages. One is marked simply 1249. You don't ask if that's the year or just an inside joke. Either way, you don't want to touch it. What's remarkable is how much these monastic brews influence the outside world. Nobles came here for their medicinal beer, travelers stopped for a cup, and even kings sent envoys to negotiate bulk orders. One royal document you glance at, sealed in wax, shows an actual annual order of 50 barrels for courtly use. You're not sure whether to be impressed or mildly concerned, and while monks kept the best stuff for guests and high days, they also gave it away to the poor. Imagine showing up to your local monastery for help and getting bread, soup, and a pint of seasonal double. Not bad. You're now seated with the brewers at a low table. One of them pours a pale golden beer with a head so thick it looks like whipped cream. He raises his cup and says, "To St. Arnold, patron of brewers. May your mash never scorch." Everyone drinks. Another toasts St. Bridget, who supposedly turned her bathwater into beer for thirsty lepers. You sip in her honor. It tastes clean? Cleanish. And then there's the weirdest bit of all. In some abbeys, the brewing records were encoded, not to keep the secrets safe from invaders, but to keep them safe from other monasteries. That's right, holy beer wars. Spreadsheets in Latin, possibly petty. You lean back, slightly tipsy, definitely full. The air smells like grain, hops, beeswax candles, and theology. It's peaceful, strangely comforting, and surprisingly fun. As the monks clean up, one younger brother offers you a flask. "Pilgrim's portion," he says with a wink. "For the road." You slip it into your pouch. Outside, the stars are bright. The cool air sobers you just a little, but not too much. Just enough to realize something. Monks weren't just preserving scripture, they were preserving flavor. They were brewers of beauty, alchemists of comfort, and they made sure that even in a world of plague, war, and taxes, there was always something to raise a cup to. You take one last look at the abbey, then turn down the path. Your flask bumps against your side. The night is young, and the road, for once, feels soft beneath your feet. The abbey disappears behind you, swallowed by morning mist and the distant sound of a monk sneezing politely into his sleeve. You've barely gone a mile down the road when a rider thunders past, cloaked in velvet, shouting something about rosewater wine night at the castle. Naturally, you follow. Soon enough, you're back among nobles, but this time, it's not a grand feast. It's something stranger, smaller, experimental. Welcome to the alchemical corner of medieval mixology, where herbs meet booze, courtly love meets questionable science, and someone somewhere has definitely added powdered emerald to a cocktail. You enter a private solar where nobles lounge on embroidered cushions. The room smells like crushed petals, lemon rind, and ambition. In the center, a servant mixes drinks, not pours. Mixes a jug of milk, a vial of mint oil, a sprinkle of dried violets. All swirled into a ceramic goblet and passed off as refreshment. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like if perfume learned how to punch. Courtly cocktails, you learn, were part art, part brag, and part accidental chemistry. Nobles love to invent signature drinks, combinations of wine, mead, or spirits with rosewater, orange blossoms, almond milk, vinegar, flower petals, or occasionally gold leaf. Not for flavor, for sparkle. And the weirder the combo, the more attention you got. You hear whispers of milk punch with cardamom, fennel ale float, and something terrifying called syrup of violets over ice shards soaked in cherry vinegar. Historians still argue whether these drinks were genuinely consumed or simply theatrical, displayed for wow factor and barely touched. Either way, they existed. Medieval drink menus could have given modern molecular bars a run for their money. The favorite tonight is posset, a warm blend of milk, curdled with ale or wine, thickened with egg yolk and flavored with nutmeg or saffron. You brace yourself. The texture is clumpy, but oddly comforting, like spiked tapioca that lost its will to live. Across the room, a noble boasts that his physician invented a healthful bitters tonic involving wormwood, gentian root, and just a whisper of snake powder. You raise your eyebrows. He nods solemnly. Helps with wind. Welcome to the blurry line between beverage and cure-all. In many courts, drinks weren't just for taste, they were medicine. Or at least people hoped they were. Scholars wrote entire volumes on liquid tonics to treat everything from melancholy to hot blood. Most were alcohol-based. Naturally. A lady nearby offers you a cordial made of quince juice and spiced brandy, served in a tiny glass the size of a thimble. For nerves, she says sweetly, you drink it. Your nerves are not soothed, but your lips go numb. So, success? Then comes surfeit water, a post-feast digestive brewed with fennel, cinnamon, and enough sugar to qualify as medieval Red Bull. This one's not for enjoyment, it's for survival. Because once you've eaten a swan stuffed with a duck stuffed with a fig, you need something to get it moving again. You overhear a knight swearing by wormwood brandy with elderflower and silver shavings. His squire quietly adds that it made the knight recite poetry to a tapestry for 2 hours. You nod. Been there. In one corner, a group of younger nobles are playing a game. Invent the weirdest possible drink, then dare each other to sip it. The current champion is a lukewarm blend of mead, pomegranate seeds, dried basil, and goat's milk foam. It tastes reportedly like betrayal, yet amid all the chaos, there's beauty. The colors, the scents, the sheer inventiveness. One drink is layered, red syrup, golden wine, and a frothy top of whipped almond milk. Another is served in a hollowed lemon, garnished with candied rose petals. You're pretty sure someone snuck in a hibiscus flower just to say they did it first. But don't get too dreamy. Some nobles took things too far. There are records of elixirs laced with crushed pearls, mercury, yep, and even bits of fossilized bone, usually under the claim of enhancing vitality. Spoiler, they did not. They enhanced your odds of meeting the Lord early. You're handed a glass of something labeled simply the elixir. You take one sniff and pass it on. You're not ready to transcend dimensions tonight. A physician nearby explains that many of these drinks weren't just courtly curiosities. They were rooted in humoral theory. You know, the belief that your body is ruled by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Drinks were made to balance these. Too melancholic? Try wine with mint and honey. Too sanguine? Sour cider with powdered bark. Do they work? Well, historians still argue whether these prescriptions were genuine cures or just a way to drink brandy with extra steps. The sun sets. Torches are lit. The room glows gold and soft pink from rose-tinted glassware. Someone begins singing softly in Latin, possibly about digestion. It's oddly soothing. You're offered one final concoction. Peach mead with a dash of rosemary served in a cooled pewter cup. It's simple, elegant, and best of all, recognizably drinkable. You sip. Sweet. Herbal. Clean. You sit back, letting the evening settle over you like silk. And here's the funny part. Amid all the chaos, these odd medieval drinks feel oddly modern, trendy even. You wouldn't be surprised to see one of them on a rooftop bar in Barcelona next week. Because humans, no matter the century, love a fancy drink, love to show off, love to experiment. And most of all, they love to believe that one perfect sip can fix everything, from heartbreak to hiccups. You close your eyes. Somewhere someone is pouring another rosewater fizz over crushed almonds. You let the sound of laughter and clinking cups lull you, not drunk, just dreaming. You wake up in a different part of the castle. The same candlelit ambiance, same velvet cushions. But the vibe? Oh, it's taken a turn. The music is louder, the laughter looser, and someone is attempting to juggle apples while standing on a barrel. You've stumbled into the after-feast drinking phase, better known as the medieval liquid Olympics. Forget courtly cocktails. Forget meditative mead. This is where things get messy. Before you can find your bearings, a servant presses a goblet into your hands. It's brimming with red wine. Probably Hippocras, but maybe just a hastily mixed blend of everything that didn't get finished during the main feast. It tastes like nutmeg, cherry, and ambition. Across the hall, two knights are locked in a stare-down, hands poised over their goblets. A third noble counts them down. 3, 2, drink. And just like that, they chug. The first to slam his cup down roars in victory. The other belches, then promptly topples backward. Welcome to the medieval drinking contest. These weren't rare events. In fact, they were practically expected at noble gatherings. Drinking wasn't just about celebration, it was a public sport. A display of strength, endurance, and how well you could stay upright while singing bawdy songs in Latin. The more you could handle, the more respected you were. Kind of like high school, but with chainmail and way more velvet. And yes, there were rules, sort of. Some courts had drinking orders. Basically glorified clubs of nobles who gathered just to outdrink one another. One German group in the 15th century kept official drinking logs. Like sports stats, but for chugging. Others had custom goblets that held absurd amounts of liquid. Some shaped like animals or castles just to make things weirdly competitive. Tonight, you watch as a noble attempts to drink from a double-ended horn while reciting his lineage. He fails at the third great-grandfather and ends up wearing most of his drink. Applause erupts. Someone shouts, "Make him a bishop!" You glance around the room. It's a circus. One lady is spinning a goblet on her finger like a coin. A jester is encouraging a bishop to drink wine out of his own shoe. Spoiler, he does. There's a chant going, "Chug the fig wine! Chug the fig wine!" And a very dazed young man complying with alarming enthusiasm. You take a cautious sip of your own drink. It's spiced, yes, but also syrupy. Possibly the remnants of piment, a grape-honey hybrid popular in the wealthier courts. Tasty until it's not. But it's not just nobles getting in on the action. Servants, musicians, even a stablemaster wander through with drinks in hand. The social lines blur, especially as the goblets empty. One second you're sitting next to a baron, the next he's snoring on your shoulder and muttering something about a haunted goose. Historians still argue whether these marathon feasts were strategic. Some say they helped cement alliances. What better way to bond than over a mutual hangover? Others insist it was pure theater, a way for nobles to show off wealth, stamina, and just enough recklessness to be considered charming. You know, until someone fell into the moat. There's a strange silence, and then clang! A massive silver tankard is placed on the table. It's the coup de grace of the evening, the loving cup. This communal goblet, polished and ornate, is passed around in a circle. Each person takes a sip, says something vaguely meaningful, or just makes chicken noises, and passes it on. It's about unity, about trust, and about hoping the last person didn't backwash too aggressively. You receive it. The cup is warm. It smells like 10 kinds of wine and probably a touch of mead. You sip, mutter, "To goats that never betray us," and pass it along. People nod in solemn agreement. No one likes a treacherous goat. Suddenly, a bell rings. A man in a feathered hat declares, "It's time for the stand." You learn that the stand is a game where nobles drink until they can no longer stand without swaying. Simple, brutal, entertaining. One by one, they rise, toast, and try to hold themselves upright for the count of 10. Those who wobble must sit and recite a limerick. Those who fall, well, they're lovingly dragged behind a curtain for the snoring corner. You watch as one noble, red-faced and determined, nails the balance. People cheer. Another hiccups on step 3 and begins reciting the history of his cousin's dog instead. It's surprisingly moving. A lady near you shares a tip. You must eat something greasy before these nights. She hands you a slice of roast pork wrapped in mint leaves. It's a lifesaver, or at least a stomach saver. But not everyone plays the fool. A few older nobles sit calmly, sipping fortified wine with the focus of monks. You ask one what it is. Verjuice, he says, an acidic drink made from unripe grapes or crab apples. Tart? Sharp. Said to cleanse the palate and the soul. You try it. Your mouth puckers so hard it tries to fold in on itself. Cleansing? Absolutely. And then, just when you think things are slowing down, someone introduces a game called Cup of Fortune. A rotating tray of goblets, some filled with wine, others vinegar, one with pickled garlic water. You pick blind. You drink. You hope. You spin. You sip. It's ale with honey and hot mustard. You are confused. People laugh. A bard writes a song about your face. You pretend this was the plan. And so the night rolls on. You see things you won't remember. Hear stories you'll half remember and tell badly for years. The drink flows. The music drifts between chaos and lullaby. You lean back against a tapestry. It smells like damp velvet and old oak. Your cup is empty. Your heart is full. And just before your eyes close, you think, even in the absurdity, the mess, the hiccups, and the clinking chaos, there's something beautiful here. A shared silliness. A very human tradition. A reminder that sometimes not taking yourself too seriously is the most noble act of all. Morning light creeps in through narrow stained glass windows, throwing streaks of blue and red across the stone floor. Your tongue feels like it's wearing a wool, and your breath could probably light a torch. Congratulations, noble sleeper. You survived another medieval party. But the castle doesn't rest. Servants are already scrubbing tables sticky with mead and meat fat, while someone's trying to get a rooster out of the wine cellar. You sit up slowly only to find a servant handing you, what else, a fresh goblet. This time, though, the mood shifts. You're not at a feast. You're backstage now, behind the glamour. Welcome to the strange, stressful, and surprisingly strategic life of the royal cupbearer. You probably imagined a guy in tights refilling goblets and whispering, "Your Grace," a lot. But being a cupbearer was way more than that. It was one of the most sensitive, high-risk jobs in the entire castle. Why? 2 words. Poison control. Your life, quite literally, is in this person's hands. The cupbearer had to monitor everything that went into the royal or noble goblet. Who poured it, who held it, how long it sat out. They'd test it, sometimes sip it, and if things were tense, watch it like a hawk until the cup met the noble's lips. You watch as the current cupbearer, a sharp-eyed young man named Alan, checks the wine barrel's seal. Then he sniffs the cork. Then he tilts the goblet under a beam of light to inspect for flecks. You assume he's looking for powdered wolfsbane, or maybe someone's idea of a prank involving powdered eel bladder. Both have happened. Before. Alan sees you watching and offers a grin. "You can trust this one," he says. "I only poisoned 2 dukes last week." You laugh nervously. He does not. It's not just about poison, though. The cupbearer is a chess master in a room full of drunk bishops. They memorize cup placement. Who's drinking what, when, and how much. Mix-ups are dangerous. Offenses are worse. Giving the wrong noble the wrong cup. That could start a family feud. Or at least get you assigned to latrine duty until next harvest. Alan points out the subtle code. A twist of ribbon on the goblet stem means the duke wants only weak wine. A sprig of mint equals no spice. A copper ring equals check for poison twice. You realize it's like medieval barista shorthand, only instead of oat milk foam, it's "please make sure this doesn't kill me." And don't forget politics. A gifted goblet was a diplomatic weapon. It might be filled with a rare vintage to impress a guest, or just enough vinegar to insult them without saying a word. The cupbearer delivered these drinks with precise body language. A slight bow meant welcome. A raised eyebrow? Careful. A completely blank stare? We're watching you. You shadow Alan for an hour as he navigates the castle halls. He brings mulled cider to a noblewoman whose husband recently tried to claim part of the king's estate. She sips, smiles. He bows exactly 1 inch deeper than usual. Message received. In another chamber, he serves diluted ale to a visiting abbot. The cup has a carved fish on the base, a symbol of religious purity. The abbot nods approvingly. No words exchanged. Just drink diplomacy. But there's more. Cupbearers also manage the drink storage, the royal cellars where barrels were inventoried, guarded, and occasionally tampered with. You follow Alan into the wine vault beneath the castle. It's cold, damp. Smells like earth, mold, and a hint of cherry mead. Barrels are stacked like fortresses, some marked with wax seals, others with chalk runes only cupbearers could read. Alan explains how they rotate stock to avoid spoilage, test for leaks with oil-dipped feathers, and occasionally sink a decoy barrel to catch thieves. Apparently 1 year they caught a cook siphoning brandy through a goose quill. That's either desperate or genius. Historians still argue. Alan opens a small cask and offers you a sip. Pear wine with a trace of ginger. Smooth, regal. He nods. That one's for the queen. No one else touches it, ever. And if someone does, the cupbearer investigates. You now understand. This isn't a servant. This is a one-person MI6 with a ladle. You pass through the tasting room, where 3 young cupbearers are blind sampling wines. They're grading for clarity, flavor, spice balance, and, get this, personality. Apparently a wine with too much confidence is best served to overambitious suitors. Back in the Great Hall, the nobles begin trickling in again, some with bed hair, others looking suspiciously chipper. Alan springs into action. He places a goblet beside the chancellor's chair, then one next to the royal jester. Cinnamon ale, always. He tests, adjusts, and nods to a scribe keeping track of who's had what. You sit down, slightly dizzy from watching him work. He joins you briefly and sighs. Sometimes, he says, I dream of a simple drink. No drama, no codes. Just cold ale and silence. You raise your cup in solidarity. Here's the quiet truth. In a world of swords, schemes, and shaky alliances, a drink was never just a drink. It was trust, power, performance. And the person in charge of that had to know every guest, every mood, and every trick in the book. As you watch Alan move back into the crowd, goblet balanced perfectly, expression unreadable, you feel a strange kind of awe. The king might wear a crown. But tonight, the cupbearer holds the kingdom in his hands. You're outside now, air crisper, eyes clearer, maybe still a little tipsy. The castle's stone walls glow amber under the afternoon sun, and the gardens beyond are buzzing, literally, with bees and bored nobles, trying not to trip on their own cloaks. You're heading toward what you were told is a light refreshment gathering, which sounds innocent enough. But as you round the corner and see the trestle tables piled with jugs, flasks, wooden cups, and odd fruits, you realize, oh no. You're about to dive headfirst into the curious, chaotic world of fruit wines and fermented surprises. Forget grapes. Today is all about peaches, cherries, plums, and things that probably weren't meant to be fermented, but somehow were anyway. A smiling servant hands you a goblet of pale amber liquid. It smells sweet, tangy. You sip. Peach wine. Not bad. It's soft, light, a little fizzy around the edges. You look up and someone is already telling you how the peaches came from the noble's private orchard, hand-plucked by virgins at dawn. You nod, unsure whether that improves the taste or makes it weirder. Fruit wine wasn't just a novelty, it was a necessity. Grapes didn't grow everywhere. In chillier climates, or during years when vineyard harvests failed, folks turned to what they did have. Apples, plums, elderberries, quince. Anything juicy enough to crush and forget about in a sealed barrel for a few weeks. In fact, cherry wine was a favorite in certain regions, especially among ladies of the court. It was said to be merrymaking but gentle, which you take to mean it gets you buzzed without inspiring table dances. You're handed a cup. It's tart like a punch in the mouth from a jam-covered glove, but it grows on you. Further down the table is something called perry. You're told it's like cider but made with pears. You take a sip. It's dry, almost floral. The kind of drink that makes you want to write poetry about bees, which you find out some nobles actually did. There's a debate nearby over whether birch sap wine counts as real wine or forest dribble. You sneak a taste. It's surprisingly light with a woody undertone, like drinking a tree's opinion on spring. Then comes a jug labeled simply rhubarb. You pause. Someone assures you it's perfectly fine. Very cleansing, they say. Encourages bowel honesty. You take the tiniest sip. It's tart enough to reset your entire palate, and possibly your soul. Historians still argue whether fruit wines were considered high class or rustic. Some say noble households embraced them during lean times, using clever spices and sugar to dress them up. Others claim it was more of a countryside thing, where people made the best of whatever was growing near their goat shed. But then again, you're watching a baron sip fermented strawberry cider from a gold-rimmed goblet while quoting Ovid, so class lines might be a bit blurred. A young noblewoman waves you over to try something called rose-hip cordial. It's a rich red, slightly syrupy, served cold with a sprig of mint. She claims it's very restorative. You sip, it's good, like if tea went to finishing school and married into money. Nearby, a brewer enthusiastically describes a failed attempt to ferment turnip juice. Too earthy, he admits. Tasted like regret. You respect the honesty. One gentleman, proudly displaying his stained fingers, offers you a glass of blackberry wine he made himself. Left to ferment in my summer tower, he says, as if that explains the sediment. You swirl the cup. It's thick, but not bad, like drinking a rustic pie through a straw. Another trend you're introduced to is spiced cider punch, a festive blend of apple wine, cloves, cinnamon, and honey. Served warm in the colder months, it was the medieval version of a cozy blanket. One sip, and you understand why entire winter festivals revolved around this stuff. It's like hugging a fireplace. But perhaps the most surprising guest at this fruity party? Dandelion wine. A bright, bittersweet brew made from boiled petals, lemon zest, and sometimes a touch of ginger. You taste it, expecting garden clippings, but instead, sunshine. Earthy, light, like drinking the memory of summer. You're beginning to see a pattern. These weren't just drinks, they were seasonal experiences. A way to bottle the orchard, to preserve the fleeting. In a time before refrigeration or year-round fruit bowls, fermented drinks became liquid memory. A noble nearby explains how his household has a tradition. Each child's birth is honored with a fruit wine made from whatever was ripe that week. Stored for years. Opened on their 16th birthday. You blink. That's kind of beautiful. And here's the quirky part. Some of these fruit wines were considered medicinal. Elderberry for colds, cherry for the blood, plum wine for inner dampness, whatever that means. It was all very humoral theory, but with better packaging. Even now, nobles cluster around a large wooden bowl of something they're calling midsummer nectar. You peer in. Chunks of pear, swirls of honey, floating petals, possibly mint. It looks like a flower bed got drunk and threw a party. You take a ladleful, it's delicious. A bard begins to sing a song about a man who fell in love with a peach tree. No one stops him. You recline under a tree, sipping your plum cordial, half listening to tales of lost harvests and miracle brews. The air smells like ripe apples and sweet hay. Someone offers you a candied cherry on a stick. You take it. It melts like wine in the sun. The day stretches long. The world slows. And as your eyes begin to close, you think, fruit doesn't last forever, but wine, Wine remembers. Night again. Not a banquet this time. No velvet-draped halls or trumpets blaring for noble entrances. You're in a courtyard surrounded by pine branches and flickering torches. The air carries the scent of mulled cider and burning rosemary. People are singing. Not court songs, but something older. Earthier. You've stumbled into a seasonal celebration, and tonight's drink is wassail. It's the winter solstice, or maybe the feast of St. Agnes, or just a long night with no plans and too much cider. These medieval parties didn't need exact dates to get festive. What they did need? Spiced alcohol, preferably in a bowl big enough to swim in. You're handed a carved wooden cup. The liquid inside steams gently, cloudy gold, flecked with cinnamon, cloves, and floating apple slices. You sip. It's sweet, then sharp, then warm all the way down. This is wassail, part drink, part ritual, all cozy chaos. And it's not just for nobles. Peasants, knights, nuns, bailiffs, everyone has some version of it. It began as a pagan offering to fruit trees, yes, really, and slowly evolved into the go-to winter beverage across all levels of society. You toast the trees to encourage next year's harvest, literally. People would carry cups into the orchards, sing to the branches, splash a little cider on the bark, and hope for apples. Kind of like plant-based bribery. You sip again, letting the spice tingle on your tongue. Someone shouts, "Wassail!" and a chorus echoes it back. The word itself comes from Old Norse, vesheil, meaning be healthy. Which is ironic, considering how strong this brew is. The bowl is passed from hand to hand. Each person sips, says a blessing or a joke, and passes it on. It's less about intoxication and more about connection. To the land, to each other, to the strange comfort of warm drink on a cold night. You notice a pattern. Different drinks for different times of year. Spring brings honey-infused meads, laced with early herbs like mint and lemon balm. The lightness echoes the season. Bright, hopeful, green. Summer? That's for fruit wines. Berry punches, cherry cordials, lightly fermented things that fizz and cool. Often chilled in wells or buried in snow from the mountains if you were fancy. Autumn is all about ciders and spiced ales. The flavors get darker, heavier, deeper. Apple and pear dominate, often boiled with cinnamon, dried orange, and nutmeg. This is when hearths get louder and drinks get thicker. And then comes winter, the heavyweight. Mulled wine, wassail, metheglin, even ale boiled with milk and oats, like drinking bread pudding by the mugful. It's meant to stick to your ribs, meant to keep you warm, meant to keep you going when the sun forgets to rise. One noble explains his family's tradition. 12 drinks of Christmas. A different concoction each night, ranging from a delicate almond milk punch to a terrifying mixture called fig vinegar fizz. You ask about that one. He makes a face. Unforgivable, he says. Another woman describes how during Candlemas, her household serves rose petal mead from ceramic cups shaped like lambs. Too sweet, she says. But the lambs are cute. Even Lent, with its fasting and solemnity, wasn't entirely dry. Monks brewed strong ale dubbed liquid bread. It had enough body to fill your belly, and enough alcohol to make the prayer slightly more musical. Historians still debate how dry Lent actually was. Some orders went full ascetic. No ale, no wine, nothing but water and sadness. Others? Let's just say they found loopholes. If it came from a grain and was brewed by God-fearing hands, it was basically soup. You now find yourself seated beside a bonfire, sipping a cup of spiced almond milk punch, served cold and sprinkled with nutmeg. Children run by with sticky fingers and red cheeks, holding mugs of watered-down cider. An old man plays a reed flute. Someone's roasting chestnuts, but one falls into the fire with a pop, startling a squire into spilling his entire drink. Laughter. This is different from the noble feasts. Less ceremony, more soul. These seasonal drinks weren't just for flavor. They were a way of marking time. A sip that said, "We've made it through the harvest," or "We survived another winter," or even, "Hey, the sun came back today. Let's get slightly tipsy in its honor." A servant hands you a mug of solstice syrup, a blend of plum wine, molasses, and cloves. You brace yourself, sip, and wince. It's like drinking spiced glue. But it grows on you, like tradition, like family, like seasonal things that return, year after year. A woman nearby raises her cup and toasts to the next planting. Others follow, to full barrels, to fat geese. To drink that doesn't taste like sadness. You lift your own. To all of it, you say. They cheer. And beneath the stars, as frost creeps across the grass and smoke drifts lazily into the sky, you sip and sip again. Because here, in this moment, with cold fingers and a warm belly, you realize, medieval people didn't just drink to forget. They drank to remember, to mark the seasons, to honor the frost, to celebrate the return of light. And you? You'll never look at spice cider the same way again. The next morning hits a little harder than expected. Not because you drank too much. Okay, maybe a little. But because today you've been tasked with an impossible quest. Find clean water. You step out of your chamber with a goblet in hand and a sense of hope in your heart. It dies quickly. Because this is the medieval world. And water? Water is suspicious. Streams shimmer with algae. Wells are murky. Rain barrels are full of mosquito drama. You eye a fountain in the courtyard that looks charming until you see the stable boy washing his feet in it. So, what do nobles drink when they're not trying to get tipsy or poetic? You're about to find out. The first stop is the castle kitchen, where a cook is boiling water with herbs. "For the young lord's morning infusion," she says. You peek into the pot. It's mint, rosemary, and some leaves you're not convinced aren't just weeds. But the key? It's been boiled. Boiling water wasn't just for tea, it was survival. Nobles knew on some level that raw water could make you violently ill. So they infused it with herbs, added fruit juice or turned it into cordials, light, slightly sweetened drinks that straddled the line between beverage and medicine. You're handed a cup of barley water, boiled grains strained and chilled. It's murky, bland, and surprisingly refreshing. Like oat milk's medieval cousin that dropped out of monk school. It was especially popular during illnesses, served to people too weak to handle wine. Then there's herbal tea, which wasn't just for quiet afternoons. It was a serious beverage category. Chamomile, sage, mint, elderflower, lemon balm, anything that grew nearby and didn't kill you immediately got brewed. Not always for taste. Often for digestion, temperament, or vaguely warding off demons. Sometimes all three. You sip a blend of thyme and lavender. It's bitter but calming. The steward explains that it reduces the heat of the liver, which sounds like something a horoscope would say, but okay. Still, tea-like infusions weren't enough for heavy workdays, or recovery from an entire night of wassailing. Enter small ale again. You remember this one. Weak, barely alcoholic, brewed daily, consumed constantly. You walk past a servant handing mugs of it to gardeners. Even kids drink it. It's basically medieval Capri Sun. But here's something new. Milk. Not for everyone, especially not adults. But it was consumed, particularly by the wealthy with access to fresh cows, goats, or even sheep. You're offered a cold cup of goat's milk, thick and grassy. Not exactly refreshing, but undeniably filling. And if you were really daring, buttermilk. That's right. Fermented leftover from butter making. Tangy, sour, said to be good for digestion. You take a sip. It tastes like disappointment with a hint of barn. Nobles sometimes drank it mixed with herbs and honey, especially during Lent. That didn't help the flavor, but it dressed it up enough to feel fancy. Kind of like adding whipped cream to regret. One servant suggests a solution: diluted wine. You scoff until you realize they don't mean bad wine. They mean very weak wine. Just enough to kill bacteria in the water, but not enough to send you reciting poetry to the pantry again. It's called table wine, and it was served with lunch, dinner, and sometimes breakfast. Think of it as medieval vitamin water, only more likely to stain your tunic. Then there's vinegar water, called pasca if you're feeling Roman. Soldiers used to drink it, and it stuck around as a kind of poor man's hydration hack. It's just water and vinegar, sometimes with herbs. You try it. It's like drinking salad dressing through a time machine. Sharp. But oddly bracing? Even nobles used it, especially when traveling or during fasting seasons. It was believed to clean the body, sharpen the mind, and make you less likely to die from questionable puddles. You pass by a hallway where a tutor is lecturing a boy on the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and how each beverage affects them. Wine heats the blood, ale swells the belly, milk spoils the phlegm, water cools the soul. You take a long sip of mint water and wonder how your soul's doing. Historians still argue whether the average noble truly feared water, or if they simply avoided it out of taste and tradition. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. A mix of caution, culture, and the undeniable fact that most water tasted like sadness, unless fixed with herbs, fruit, or a splash of something stronger. One thing is certain: nobody drank plain water if they could avoid it. Not unless it came from a mountain spring guarded by nuns or was boiled until it apologized for existing. You're starting to understand that hydration in the Middle Ages was a project, a thing you had to think about, prepare, flavor, dilute, boil, bless. Every cup held intention. Even now, sitting on a stone bench under a willow tree, you're handed a delicate drink called cold herb wine. A summer specialty made by steeping herbs in lightly fermented white wine, then chilling it in clay pots buried in wet sand. It's cool, earthy, exactly what your head needs. And in that moment, sipping quietly, you realize, even when they weren't drinking to get merry, medieval people still drank to feel something. Relief, health, clarity, a little safety in every swallow. And in a world where disease loomed like fog and life was rarely certain, even a simple drink of barley water or elderflower tea could feel like a kind of quiet miracle. By now, you've seen it all, or so you think. You've drunk from goblets made of gold, sipped wine spiced with cinnamon and confusion, and survived a hangover that probably qualifies as a minor miracle. But tonight, things feel different. The air is heavier. The torches burn lower. The crowd is smaller. And the drinks, let's just say, they whisper back. You've entered the world of forbidden brews and foreign fire. The undercurrent of medieval noble drinking, where drinks weren't just luxury or tradition, but curiosity, risk, even a little fear. A man with a braided beard offers you a squat bottle, dark glass, no label. Horse milk spirit, he says, from the east. You blink. He grins. Very smooth. You raise an eyebrow, but before you can decline, someone else leans in. I tried it once, she says, voice hushed. Made me dream of eagles. You shrug. Bottoms up. Kumis, that's what it's called. Fermented mare's milk, a Central Asian specialty, carried westward by traders, nomads, and the occasional adventurous Mongol emissary who thought wine was for cowards. It's sharp, tangy, slightly fizzy, and a little like someone carbonated yogurt and dared you to like it. You cough. Your throat tingles. It's not bad, just intense. Like drinking saddle leather with a hint of regret. But everyone around you nods approvingly. You didn't spit it out, someone says. You're fine. But kumis is just the start. A servant enters with a silver tray holding delicate glasses filled with something emerald green. It glows faintly in the firelight. Someone says it's fairy wine, and everyone chuckles. But you catch the real name whispered absinthe. Not the modern version, this one's an early ancestor. Wormwood-infused wine or brandy brewed in secret by alchemists and apothecaries. Strong, bitter, supposedly mind-expanding. Also possibly illegal depending on the kingdom and how twitchy the local bishop feels that week. You sip. It burns. Not like fire, more like realization. Anise floods your mouth. The taste clings, oddly floral. Someone next to you starts humming a Gregorian chant they didn't know they knew. There's a reason these drinks were called elixirs. Not just for fun. They were believed to enhance vision, unlock memory, open the spirit. Sometimes revered, sometimes banned. Across the room, a noble explains how his uncle was exiled for bringing back a Syrian love potion made from fermented dates, nutmeg, rosewater, and something called black seed oil. He said it worked, the noble adds. Too well. You sip cautiously from a cup of date wine, sweet and syrupy with a spicy kick. It tastes like candied secrets. Another guest arrives with a flask of coconut toddy, fermented palm sap brought by sea traders. You're told it ferments overnight, has the kick of a mule, and smells like paradise if paradise got sunburned. One sip and you feel like you've been slapped by a very friendly tree. And then, the fire spirits. Stronger than ale, hotter than wine. These are proto-distillations. Not quite refined spirits as we know them today, but potent concoctions that monks and foreign alchemists dabbled in. Distilled barley, spiced grappa, or something resembling aquavitae. Water of life. They weren't sipping drinks. They were announcements. A monk named Brother Ludo offers you a thimbleful of clear liquid in a tiny iron cup. Don't inhale first, he says. You don't. You sip. It's lightning. It's remorse. It's surprisingly minty. Good for toothaches, Ludo adds. And communicating with the dead, if you're into that. Historians still argue whether these early spirits were common among nobles or just rare novelties, traded, gifted, or brought back from foreign campaigns. Some claim distilled alcohol was mainly medicinal in the early Middle Ages. Others insist nobles drank it at secret feasts, testing their tolerance and their luck in equal measure. Back in the room, a small gathering forms around a glowing, jewel-colored drink. Pomegranate wine, spiced with saffron and floating gold flakes. Imported from Byzantium, someone murmurs. Only served on equinoxes. You stare at the gold flecks. You drink. It tastes like sunlight that's forgotten how to behave. But not every exotic drink is respected. Some are feared. There's a story told, half joking, half hushed, about a prince who drank fermented scorpion tail wine in Cairo and came back speaking only in riddles. Someone adds, he's a bishop now. Everyone laughs, no one explains. There's a final offering. Spiced tobacco cordial infused with dried leaf, honey, and vinegar. Not smoked, sipped. A slow, bitter burn. It was said to calm nerves, sharpen the senses, and in one text, make the stars sing. You decline. One man doesn't. He immediately tries to recite a poem to a houseplant. By now the room has changed. Laughter is quieter, words are slower. You feel the drinks layering, spices over smoke, sweetness over heat. It's not drunkenness, not entirely, it's expansion. Curiosity made liquid. And this, you realize, was the real thrill for medieval nobles. Not just getting drunk, but getting transformed. Tasting the world. Traveling through goblets, letting foreign lands melt on their tongues. Some for power, some for pleasure. Some just to say they did. You lean back, cup still warm in your hands, and smile. Because tonight your drink wasn't just fermented, it was forbidden. It was foreign. It was alive. And somehow, so are you. Your surroundings shift once again. Gone are the noble feasts, the solemn abbeys, the rowdy taverns. Tonight, your drink is brewed not in barrels or goblets, but in cauldrons. And it bubbles. Gently, like it's thinking dark thoughts. You've wandered into the hush of the forest, or perhaps just a very remote part of the castle garden where no one bothers to light torches. The air smells like herbs, smoke, and damp stone. A woman in a tattered cloak greets you without a word and gestures to a low stool beside a fire. Welcome to the shadowy world of potions, charms, and herbal wine, where drink meets magic, and the line between healer and witch is thinner than a strand of hair. She hands you a clay cup. The liquid is dark, muddled, smells like elderberries and regret. You sip. It's bitter, so bitter it feels personal. But then something changes. A sweetness hidden under layers of bark, root, and ash. Good for the blood, she says. Also for dreams. You're not sure if that's comforting. These kinds of drinks weren't served at court banquets. They were prepared in kitchens, tucked behind herb gardens, simmered in bronze pots by women who knew exactly how much yarrow, wormwood, and poppy to use before things got complicated. In noble households, these brews had many names: tonics, cordials, elixirs. But among the whispers, they were called witches' wine. And the truth? Some nobles loved them, especially noblewomen who kept private apothecaries tucked behind dressing rooms or disguised as innocent spice cabinets. These weren't party drinks. They were personal. One noblewoman you meet has a collection of sleep potions, each more obscure than the last. Wine infused with poppy seed and vinegar, honey thyme syrup mixed into cider, even a concoction involving heated almond milk and valerian root, reportedly capable of knocking out a grown knight mid-compliment. She smiles. My husband snores like an ox. This works better than a dagger. You sip something green. It smells of basil and crushed petals. Tastes like a meadow during a thunderstorm. Someone nearby insists it helps align the spleen. Even in the world of nobility, herbal drinks were medicine, magic, and mystery all at once. For ailments of the body, sure, but also the soul. Lovesickness, melancholy, nightmares, ambition. There was always something to sip for that. A man pours you a strange golden liquor. Angelica, root, and honey, he says. The monks say it wards off plague, or at least makes you forget about it. You take a sip. It's strong, sweet, with an aftertaste of church incense and maybe a little fear. Then comes the mythic brews. You don't know how many are real, but the stories are very real. There's talk of a moonflower infusion, only harvested at midnight by silence. Said to cause prophetic dreams. Another noble swears by crow's eye wine, which may or may not contain actual crows. Someone else claims to own a dragon's breath cordial, which glows faintly in the dark, and makes you speak in rhymes for a full hour. Do these exist? Historians still argue. Some say the recipes were symbolic, allegorical mixtures to explain inner transformation. Others insist they were real, consumed at secret gatherings by those seeking power, insight, or just an evening less boring than embroidery. You're offered a drink called the Mirror. No ingredients listed. Clear, cold. You hesitate, then sip. It tastes familiar, like snow, like the color blue, like memory. You blink. What's in this? You ask. The brewer only shrugs. Whatever you needed. You don't ask again. Later, near a crumbling stone bench overrun with moss, you're handed a flask etched with symbols. A noble explains it contains hawthorn wine, used in some fertility rituals. Also good for heartbreak, she adds, not meeting your eyes. You pass it back. Nearby, a young woman stirs a cauldron with what looks like a carved bone spoon. The brew is deep red, the smell both sharp and floral. Rose hips and rue, she says. For courage or clarity, depends on the moon. She offers a sip. You accept. It's warm, heavy. Feels like standing at the edge of something important. As the night deepens, the drinks grow stranger. One tastes like old metal and honey, another like wood smoke and lemon balm. A third, only referred to as the widow's cup, burns the moment it hits your throat, then vanishes as if it was never there. And it's here, surrounded by shadows and scent and silence, that you begin to understand. These drinks weren't for toasts. They were for transformation, for the moments nobles didn't speak of. When they feared, when they ached, when they wondered, these potions, tonics, and brews gave them something to hold, to sip, to believe in, because belief, like wine, sometimes needs a vessel. You lie back on a patch of moss, a final cup rests on your chest. Lavender and sage, you breathe in, and as the stars blink above you and the fire dies down to glowing coals, you whisper thanks, not to the gods, not to the court, but to the nameless hands who stirred these cups. Hands that knew. Sometimes healing doesn't come in sermons or swords. Sometimes it comes in sips. The flames are lower now. You're not in a forest or a grand hall, but underground, deep beneath stone walls and history itself. A castle cellar, a wine vault, a place that smells like damp wood, cool earth, and obsession. You're in the noble wine cellar, and you are most definitely not supposed to be here. But your guide, a servant with a wink and a key pilfered from the steward's belt, leads you down a spiral staircase lined with cobwebs and silence. The only sound? The drip of condensation and the occasional creak of ancient wood adjusting to its own age. This is where the real stories live. Rows upon rows of barrels. Jugs, amphorae, corked flasks sealed with wax so old it's flaking like ancient skin. A single candle casts long, dancing shadows across handwritten labels. One reads, Claret, Gascony, 1336. Reserved for inheritance toast. Another, rose wine, saffron infused, only to be opened upon coronation. You can already tell this isn't a storage room. It's a liquid archive. And for nobles, it was more than practical. It was personal. Each cask tells a story, a marriage, a victory, a season of abundance. Or maybe just a particularly good summer where the peaches were extra juicy and someone got ambitious. Your guide taps one massive barrel. This one, he says, was hidden during the siege of 48. Dug into the garden and disguised as a beehive. Still drinks smooth. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Bees were furious. You move through the cellar, tracing your fingers along cool iron racks. Some bottles are decorated with ribbons. Others bear carved family crests. One has a dried flower tied to its neck, a symbol of a summer that never returned. And then, the vault. A gated section locked tight. Your guide produces another key. The Lord's private reserve, he whispers. Inside, the air grows heavier. Not with dust, but with reverence. The barrels here are older, larger, more intentional. You step past a crate marked Blackberry Solstice 1274 and spot a jug painted with delicate lilies in Latin, phrases you can't quite translate. This is no longer wine. This is legacy. Noble families didn't just drink wine, they hoarded it, cultivated it, passed it down like crowns. A good vintage was a treasure, a mark of prestige, patience, and the ability to wait for flavor. Some cellars even kept forbidden vintages, batches too strong, too strange, or too scandalous to serve at court. One jug is marked Nightshade Blend, do not serve. You back away, slowly. Historians still argue whether noble wine hoarding was practical or purely status-driven. Some argue that aging wine wasn't even understood until the later Middle Ages. Others point to inventories listing wines stored for decades, suggesting that yes, some nobles knew exactly what they were doing. One noble wrote an entire wine ledger by hand, detailing each bottle's mood, flavor, and ideal pairing. Sample entry, plum and sadness. Best with roast duck and arguments. You wander deeper. Your guide lifts a small wooden panel and reveals a hidden niche. Inside, a single bottle, black glass, unmarked. He uncorks it carefully and pours you a sip into a copper chalice. You drink. And for a moment, time folds. It's dark, deep, rich like velvet and slow like syrup. It tastes of blackberries, cloves, and long-forgotten letters. You swallow and feel warmth creep into your bones like a sunrise in reverse. That's the 1282 Winter Reserve, he says. Opened only on nights that matter. You nod. Tonight matters. In one corner, you spot phantom bottles, drinks that were stolen, replaced, or mysteriously never consumed. Some still show up in estate records, even though no one has seen them for centuries. One is labeled Saffron Rose, lost to fire, 1431. Another, reserved for treaty that never happened. Some nobles were known to fake wine inventories, claiming they owned barrels of Byzantine nectar just to intimidate rivals. Others hid their finest, vintages behind decoy racks. One even filled fake bottles with colored vinegar to trick thieves. Bold, petty, brilliant. You run your hand across a cool stone shelf and find something peculiar. A diary, bound in goatskin, stuck between two jugs. You flip it open. It's not about battles, it's tasting notes. Every entry a reflection on a drink. Tonight, plum cider, slightly sour. Reminds me of when Father left. Mint wine served too cold. Grandmother disapproved. Still drank 3 cups. You close the book gently. These cellars weren't just about wine. They were about memory. Stored, sealed, aged, remembered, and sometimes forgotten. You sit on a barrel labeled "For Peace," and someone brings you a modest cup of blackcurrant cordial. It's simple, quiet, a little sweet, no fanfare. But it feels right, because not every noble drink was made for toast or tantrums. Some were made for nights like this, for secrets, for stories, for sitting still while the world turns slowly above. The candle sputters. Your guide nods toward the stairs, but before you leave, you take one last sip from the chalice. One more taste of time, trapped in wood and waiting. And you think history is written in ink. But memory? Memory is poured. You're back in your room now, if you can call this stone-walled chamber with a straw-stuffed mattress and a single beeswax candle a room. The bed creaks. Your boots are somewhere on the floor. And beside you on a small wooden stool, one final drink waits. It's not wine, not ale, not mead, cider, tonic, or exotic moonflower cordial. It's a cloudy herbal mixture that smells faintly of mint, chamomile, and something earthy. The servant who left it simply called it the morning after. You sip. And just like that, your entire day rushes back in reverse. The heavy wine, the bubbly ale, the fruit punch that tasted like a pie, the monk's ale that nearly made you sing psalms, the loving cup, the saddle-flavored mare's milk, the secret sips in the cellar. Your stomach protests, then settles. Barely. This drink, whatever it is, was brewed with recovery in mind. Because behind all the glamour of medieval noble drinking, the rituals, the spiced extravagance, the unspoken codes, comes the cold, sober truth. Someone always has to deal with the aftermath. You shuffle out into the courtyard. Early morning fog clings low to the cobblestones. You're not alone. A knight groans by a well. A cook sits on a crate holding her head in her hands. A jester has fallen asleep face down in a cabbage patch. Someone nearby is whispering a prayer to Saint Bibiana, the patron saint of hangovers. Yes, really. You sip again. The cup is warm in your hands now. Soothing. It tastes like grass and honey and whatever's holding your dignity together. You hear stories. One noble swears by raw eggs and vinegar as a remedy. Another recommends eel broth, thickened with breadcrumbs and regret. A third insists that sitting in a cold stream cures both the head and the sins of the tongue. You smile politely and keep sipping your tea. Some households had official morning stewards, tasked with preparing hangover cures. Light broths, rehydrating cordials, or just a quiet room with a soft chair and a bucket. It's said King Edward IV once delayed a battle by a day after overindulging on elderflower wine. His steward gave him fortified cabbage tonic and strict instructions to avoid poetry for 24 hours. Historians still debate whether hangovers were viewed as shameful or just part of noble life. In many cases, they were almost a badge of honor. Proof you'd survived the feast, the toast, and whatever song ended with someone wrestling a goose. But among the wiser nobles, especially the older ones, there was a quiet reverence for restraint. For balance. You remember watching one elderly duchess at the feast, sipping just enough to warm her cheeks but never letting her words slur. Her cup never empty, never full, just enough. She called it sipping the shadow. Not drowning, not denying, just meeting the drink halfway. As you sit in the garden now, the sun breaking through the clouds, you understand. Because what you've tasted over these long, drifting nights wasn't just alcohol. It was culture. It was memory. It was ritual and rebellion, celebration and caution, luxury and survival, all poured into clay, glass, and pewter, passed hand to hand, century to century. The noble who toasts the peace treaty. The widow who keeps a bottle for anniversaries no one else remembers. The scribe who drinks nettle tea to stay awake copying stories he's never allowed to sign. The monk who blesses the ale before handing it to the weary traveler. The cupbearer who knows every guest's favorite vintage and every secret they're hiding behind a smile. The herbalist who brews the morning after cure and says nothing when you arrive. Bleary-eyed and humbled, cup in hand. You drain the last of your tea. The cup is empty, but somehow you're full. You stand, stretch, and begin the quiet walk back inside. The castle breathes slowly now. Doors creak. Fireplaces population. Life stirs. And beneath it all, always waits the next goblet. So now, dear traveler, let the last embers of this medieval evening fade to quiet ash. Let the laughter soften in your ears, the taste of cinnamon and clove retreat from your tongue. The pewter cup is set down gently. The jester's lute grows still. The barrels rest in the cool, dark cellars below, their secrets sealed in oak. You can still hear the faint echoes of a toast, the warmth of a firelit hall, the hush of a cloaked monk stirring a pot of memory. But now your breath deepens. Your limbs grow heavy, still, safe. The world outside these stone walls will keep spinning. Markets will open, carriages will roll, someone will spill a cup and blame the dog. But for now, none of that matters. You are wrapped in the gentle haze of history, floating between honeyed dreams and hearth smoke lullabies. The air smells of lavender and old parchment, of mead and moss, of soft endings. Whatever the drink was, whatever its name, wine, ale, cordial, potion, it did its work. It carried you here, to stillness, to sleep. So rest now, noble dreamer. Let the stars tuck you in with their ancient shimmer. And if you hear a distant goblet clink, don't worry. It's just the past raising a toast to you. Sweet dreams.